Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This is Rod Fleming here in the Philippines, and today we're going to just discuss a couple of little things. Firstly, I want to point out to everyone that please remember to click on subscribe, hit that bell button, and please look at the URLs which I'm about to give you, which show where you can support us. Now, there are over 300 videos on this channel now, and they all contain really valuable information. Please help to support that. To get on with the show. One of the problems we have with HSTS, that is homosexual transsexuals, let's not forget, that is true transsexuals, right? That's the real ones, is that nobody actually studies them very well. Ray Blanchard, who actually proposed, or he defined the current understanding of the typology that separates homosexual transsexuals from non-homosexual transitioners. We'll call them that just now. They're really transvestites, but very sophisticated ones. So this is a big problem because we really don't know how many there are. But what we do know is it's a very, very, very small number. There are very few HSTS. A number of years ago, it's 2018 or 19, I can't remember, I did a breakdown of all the studies I could find that discussed the prevalence of transgender as a blanket term in both the West and in Asia. And there's not that many, but there are a few. And it came up to around about 0.7%. The range was something like 0.4% to just over 1%. So we'll just take the mean and call it 0.7. That seems fair enough because this is just a rule of thumb. So 0.7% of people are trans in the first place, transgender. That is the classic homosexual or non-homosexual forms. We are not discussing transgenders here. So that's a fashion thing. It's a political and fashion thing. It has nothing to do with reality. It's just, you know, being a non-binary is like being a Rangers supporter. It's just, that's what I am, you know. It means nothing, right? So we're going to take this 0.7. Now, if we multiply that by the world's population, which is currently 7.5 billion roughly, we get 52.5 million globally of trans people, and that is actual transgenders. And again, most of the information comes from studies done on MTF, that's male to feminine. There's very little data about female to masculine, but we're just going to take it all, like that's what we've got, you know? Right, so 52.5 million, which is about the population of Colombia roughly. But we have to then try and separate out the HSTS from the non-homosexual transitioners. And that's quite tricky because, again, these studies didn't make any kind of separation like that. So we have to kind of do it for ourselves using information that we have from what we have. Now, the estimates of what the proportion of HSTS versus non-HS transitioners is that it's somewhere between 20% HSTS and maybe 40% HSTS. And I tend to think it's about 40, and that because of Fleming's axiom, a significant number actually hide in the West. You don't know they're there, or they simply turn into gay men. You know, they think it's easier to live that way because it's just too hard for them to transition. You know, never believe a gay man when he says that transsexuals are failed gay men. Gay men are failed transsexuals. It's the other way around. So if we take that kind of range there to, you know, 20 to 40%, we get maybe 10 to 20 million globally, right? And which is from roughly the population of Sweden to the population of Chile. This is not a lot of people. There are large parts of the world in which a person could go their entire lives and never meet, certainly never knowingly meet, an HSTS. They may never meet a trans person of any description, just because they are actually so rare. They're very unusual. Don't be fooled by the media The people who were making the noise on this 10 to 15 years ago were all AGPs. Now there's a lot more of them who are actually not trans at all. They're transgenders, they are non-binaries, they are people who think that, no effort, I can just say, oh, I'm a woman now, and that's it, I'm a woman. I could just say, I'm a woman now. This is nonsense. It's utter nonsense. By definition, in order to be trans, you have to transition. Right? And that means going from one to the other, not from just giving up on the gender situation, which you can't give up on anyway. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. However, well, maybe the moon was made of green cheese, and that was maybe more ridiculous. It takes a bit of thinking about it, finds things that are stupider than the idea of non-binary, by the way. So, if we translate that to the figures we have to a real world example, we'll take the UK population, and we'll find that the 7.7% of the population, which is 68 million, will give us around about 476,000 population of actual trans people. But again, for HSTS, that reduces to something between 92,500 to 185,000 people. That's it, in the whole of the UK. And yet again, there are going to be many people in the UK who never meet an HSTS. Or if they do meet an HSTS, they won't know that that's what they're dealing with. It's like, no, they don't know. But in fact, most people, they'll go through their lives and never knowingly meet anyway, an HSTS. There's a slightly bigger chance of meeting a non-homosexual transitioner, transvestite, and they'll probably know that. I mean, if you meet one of them, then you're likely to know. Even the attractive ones, they don't really pass. Sometimes simply because they're just too hot and tall. You get somebody who's 6'2", is absolutely gorgeous. Has spent a great deal of time, money, hormones, and work getting herself to look beautiful. But as soon as she walks in the door, you go, are you kidding? Anyway, so that's roughly what we're dealing with. It's a tiny, tiny group of people. And these are really marginalised. They're very much abused. They're marginalised by society as a whole, because particularly in the West, Western culture is extremely homophobic. And it's worse than that, it's actually transphobic. What Western culture doesn't like is the idea of men being feminine. It really doesn't like that. It's something that, it's very strange because, I've done things on theatre groups in prisoner war camps, and for example, on long exploration expeditions, for example, Shackleton's attempt to reach the South Pole, they took women's clothing so that the men could put on shows, with dancing girls to entertain the other men. So, in some ways, Western culture is really totally hostile to male femininity. On the other hand, it seems quite open to it. So it's a very interesting conundrum. There has never been a proper study that separates HSTS, homosexual transsexuals, from non-homosexual transitioners, which is the basic foundational issue that you must get your head around, right? They are not all the same. There's two different pathways, and they produce two completely different results, which occasionally might look kind of vaguely similar, but actually normally don't. They're very different. And especially in terms of orientation. This information, once we strip out the non-homosexual transitioners, the AGBs, the transvestites, who are mainly, well, they're non-homosexual, which means they're either heterosexual or they don't really have sex, then we're talking about a group for whom sexuality and gender are completely linked. You can't separate them. Right? The trope that you hear from queer theorists, especially in the West, you don't hear it at all in the East, I'll tell you that for nothing, especially in the West, that, gender and sexuality, they're completely separate, they're independently variable. No, they're not. In cases where that might appear to be the case, where you have, for example, a non-homosexual transitioning male, he remains attracted to women, well, he's actually being provoked by a paraphilia called autogynephilia, which causes him to fetishize himself, both himself, in terms of his brain and in terms of his body, as a woman. So he fetishizes himself as a woman and brings his body into line with that while fetishizing that body. This is not the same as a transsexual. A transsexual is just a woman, you know, who is actually in a man's body, or a male body. It's not a man's body, it's a male body. I mean, if you meet any of these people, you'll immediately go, wait a minute, these are not actually men. Look at them. They're just too cute, which will bring me to something else in a moment. Meantime, bye for now, and I'll catch you later.